moving ahead, what exactly is Maven? Maven is a build tool in which it is going to give us a set of standard. It is going to give us a defined lifecycle as well as on the dependency management, right? So let us now try to understand what exactly is the defined lifecycle it is going to give and what is the set of standards that we have to follow in Maven. So with the understanding of architecture inside us, now let's moving forward. Now Maven, if you're working on it, it will try to give us a defined life cycle which we have to use for going through the build. Okay, so when you say a defined life cycle, there is an order in which it will always be executing. And the default life cycle of Maven, which we will be going through always, is this, where the very first step of what we will be doing in terms of running a Maven for a project is first thing to generate the sources and resources. As I said, when you execute, what and all it has to perform, it will try to take a list, and for that, what and all it is needed, it will also try to take a list. Okay, so that's the very first thing that it prepares itself. And after that, the very first thing it actually executes is compilation. So compile is a phase of Maven's lifecycle where for your project, whatever Java files that you have, it will take a list of everything and it will try to do the compilation. Where, what do you mean by compile or compilation? For all the Java files that you actually have in your project, it is going to convert. So compile means if you have a file called Java file, then corresponding to that Java file, it will try to create a class file, which is nothing but object file. Like this, for every Java file that you have in a project, there will be a corresponding class file created with the same name, which is going to act as an object file, which a machine can understand. So going back to the basics, compilation means converting a file that is in a raw format, which is in a Java format, into a file which a machine can understand, which is an object file. So this step of converting it from a raw source code into an object format is what we call it as compilation. So that way, for each and every Java file that you have in your project, when you do a compilation step, Maven will try to convert all of them correspondingly into a class file. So that is the very first step that it is going to do in terms of compilation. So once it has done all the compilation, the next step that we are going to do is testing. So what kind of testing it is? So basically, Maven will try to do a unit test. A unit test is nothing but a particular testing that a developer is going to do, through which he will try to know whatever the code that he has written is working fine. So that way, now whenever you take a Java project, it is the responsibility of a developer to write a code that is a unit test code which is going to test the file whatever he has. So that way, for every Java file that he is going to write, there should be a corresponding test file for that. Okay, so suppose if 1.java is the actual source code, then in order to test this, he has to write another file which will be test1, which will be the default naming convention, and that will also be a Java file. Okay, so now using this test file, you are going to test this one.class, whatever it has been generated. And once again, when you want to do a test, this is also a raw file. So this should also be converted first into a equivalent class file. So this is how, when you say a unit test, what exactly it is going to do is, first, it will convert these test related Java files into corresponding class files, and then it will execute it. So while it is executing, it will be testing the corresponding class files which it is referring. So this way, now let's say there is one more file called 2.java, and for this you are going to get a 2.class when you compile, and for this also there is going to be a Java file which is the test going to refer, and when you run the test phase, it is going to compile these files which will create the class files correspondingly. Okay, so compile means first it will execute these two things, and when you say test phase after the compile phase, it is going to run the compilation step of this, and then it is going to run this class files through which it is going to test these two files. So it is the responsibility of the developer to write all these files along with it. So it is a practice where for each of the Java code a developer writes, equivalently he has to write a test Java file also. Okay, so that is the second phase after the compilation. Now, once you have done the complete test, you will be getting a result of the unit test, whether how many tests has been covered using this test files, and whether all this test which you have taken here has been run, and what is the output, whether it is running successfully or not. All those details will be tracked, and Maven will be giving you the result of it. Okay, so once the test has been completed, the next thing what Maven will be doing is a step called package, where packaging is the assembly step, where it is going to create a deliverable for a project. So ideally now we are going to combine all these class files and create a single deliverable. Okay, so in terms of Java, what are the packages or the deliverables that we will be giving? So usually when you combine these class files, basically you will be creating an output called as jar file or var file or EAR file, where jar file is the basic format of a Java file which you will be storing all the class file into it. So when you say a project, if you are going to give a deliverable, by default the output of a project will be any one among them, where the default type of a Java deliverable will be jar file, in which jar stands for Java archive. Okay, just like how you have a tar file or a zip file in Java, if you're trying to create a deliverable, then based on certain class files you are going to create a jar file. Okay, so this will be the standard file. Now what are these other two files? A var. Okay, before that, what is a jar? Jar is nothing but Java archive, which is going to contain one or more class files, using which when you execute that jar, it will be calling those specific class files inside it, and you will be getting a particular functionality. So that way, jar is nothing but a combination of several class files through which you will be getting a particular functionality. Okay, that is what we call it as a jar file. And now in some time, if you are not just running a normal Java application but specifically a web based application, then whatever package that you're going to create is what we call it as var, where var stands for web archive. Okay, now it is nothing different, where a var file is also going to contain the same class files. In fact, it is going to contain many jar files inside it, but in addition it will also have certain more files which is needed to define your web application. Like if you want to create a web application, you need a couple of jar files inside which it will be referring to a class, and also along with it you might be needing some HTML files, XML files, everything together, so that if you run a var, you are actually going to run a web application. Whereas jar is a simple Java archive where you will be getting a application normally. But if you want a specific Java application, even in that you will be having a jar or a couple of class files, and along with it you will be having some more web related files. That is what we call it as var. Now, in some companies, if you are trying to give a var, which is a web application, if you want to give it as a licensed var file specific to that company, then you call it as a EAR. So there is no difference between again var and EAR, other than that EAR stands for enterprise based web archive. Okay, so a var is a generic file, a web application that you will give, but you want to give it as a specific enterprise based licensed file, then we call it as a EAR, where in addition to whatever contents you are going to have in the var, you will be having some license related files. So that's how is the difference. But pretty much by default in Maven, when you say package, what is the next thing that it is going to do is it is going to create a project jar file in which it is going to consist the combination of whatever class files that you have. Okay, so now it is not going to contain these test files because this is only for testing. What is your actual product? This is the file, so you have converted it. This is what it is going to contain inside it. Okay, so when you say package, based on whatever files that you have in your project, which is the object files, it is going to create a jar or a var or a EAR specifically based on what you have defined in your pom.xml. So based on that, it is going to create, but by default it is going to create a jar file out of all the files that you have in your project. Okay, so understand that. Now, once you have done the package, then the next step what you have is what we call it as install. Now, what is this phase called install? Now, to understand install, you need to first understand what is the purpose of install. Now, install is a phase where, suppose if you have a dependency of one project with another project. Now, let's assume that you have two projects. Okay, so you have project A and you have project B. Now, when you compile and package A, you will get a a.jar. Okay, let's assume that. And when you compile B, you might get a b.jar. So this is separately. But if I say the project B is actually dependent on A, where the jar b.jar should contain the contents of a.jar, and if you are specifying the dependency in such a way, then when you are actually compiling or running the Maven for project B, we are specifying that b.jar requires a.jar as a dependency. So that way, now if you're doing compilation or any other step, what is the first thing Maven is going to do? It is going to generate the sources and the resources. So now, one of the resource which the b.jar or the project B requires is a.jar, right? As a list of resources that it needs, it is going to need a.jar. And by default, when you run Maven for this project, where is it going to check for the dependencies? Going back. So it is going to go to the local repository, and from here it will check whether the a.jar is available. Practically, if it is not available, it will go to the internet and it will try to search and download it there. But if you look, a.jar is not a common file which Maven is giving us. Unlike other plugins, the a.jar which you are going to use in Maven is a specific project which your company will be having. Now, that file will be available only in your laptop or in some machine where you have actually built it. It will not be available on the internet. So what will happen? The a.jar will neither be available on the remote repository nor it will be available in the local repository. So that way your build will fail. So what is that you have to do now is wherever this a.jar is available, you have to actually copy this file into the local repository so that when you run the project B, it searches for that a.jar in the local repository and it will be available. Okay, so that step, when you have such a kind of dependency and when you want to make a particular project's deliverable to be available in the local repository, is what we call it as install. So simply install is nothing but if you are running against a project, what it will do is it will take a copy of that project's output and it will copy it into the local repository. Okay, So that step is what we call it as install. So remember this once again. Install is not needed for all the projects, but if it is run, what it will do is for whatever project you are running the install, that project's output or deliverable, it will try to copy from that location wherever you are running. So if you are running a project from that directory, it will be creating the specific output or the deliverable in the package step in the same directory. So it will copy from that directory and it will put it inside the local repository wherever is referred in the machine, so that if you run any other project which has the dependency of that particular deliverable, it will be available in the local repository. So that way, install means copying a deliverable of that project against which you are running. It will try to copy that file into the local repository so that any other projects which is dependent on it can easily refer to it from the local repository. So like this, if you have a dependency of a project, we have to make sure after creating the package, we will run the install step. Okay. Getting it? Okay. So after the install, the next step is deploy. Okay. Now what exactly it is going to do? When I say deploy, deploy means you will be having a production environment, or you want to have a particular location on which you want to start accessing this application for testing further, or to use it for using as a production system. So that is when in the deploy, you actually tell which exact location is your production location, or the location where you want to put your particular deliverables created. Because now as a DevOps concept, we are not just focusing only on creating the deliverable, but you can also verify whether these deliverable that you have created in the package step is fine for deploying. So based on your need, if it is needed, you can actually specify that location where you want to put the file. So simply, once again, deploy is nothing but taking that particular deliverable of your project, that is a jar file or a var or EAR, and put into some particular location based on what you have specified, so that your application can be accessed from that location. So that is what we simply call it as deploy. So depending on where you want to put, a deploy can be actually putting your deliverable into a production web server so that you can run it, or you can put a particular deliverable into some other storage tool in which you will be trying to store. Okay, so depending on what exactly is the environment where you want to put your deliverable and for accessing, you will be specifying the deploy step. Okay, so we will talk about more on what exactly is deploy as we go through. But for now, remember, deploy is the last step where it will be trying to put the specific deliverable, whatever that you have created, into a location where you will be able to access the application. So these are the phases of Maven, which it will be trying to go through from the beginning to the end by default. And when I say from the beginning to end, no matter if you call any of the phase, it will always come from the beginning and it will go in the same order. So let's say you are interested to create the package only. Then what it will do is it will try to come from the beginning of first generating the sources and resources, and then it is going to do the compilation, and then it is going to do the test, and then it is going to create the package and stop only at that space specific to what you have specified to the Maven to run. So if you have set to the Maven to do only package, then from the beginning, it will try to do all the steps as part of the default cycle, and then it will stop there. Suppose if you say run only the compile, then it is going to basically come from the step, do the compilation and stop. So no matter what phase of Maven you ask Maven to run, it will always come from beginning and stop only at that. Suppose if you say you want to do the install, for doing the install, you need to create a package. for creating a package, first you need to compile and test, right? So basically it is going to come from in the same order from the beginning, and then it is going to stop at that particular phase. So you have to choose on what is the phase you want to run, but when you choose a phase, it is always going to come from the beginning and it is going to stop at that place, but it is going to go through the same order. Okay. Yeah. So testing is basically doing a unit testing, whereas compilation is the actual step in which you will be converting the raw source code of your project into the class files. Whereas the compilation error can happen anywhere. It can happen during your compile phase or while compiling your test file, because that is what I said, right? When you run a test, you are actually doing two steps. First thing is you are compiling the test related files and converting into a class, and then you are running this actual class files to test the class files of your project. So that is how it, with respect to what step you are running, if you get an error over there, it will stop it. Okay. So testing means in Maven, you are not just running the test, but you are first doing a compilation of the test file itself and then do the testing. Whereas the step before that, which is actually going to do only the compilation. But what compilation? Compilation of only the source code of that project, not all the other test code. Only the source code related to the project, it will be trying to compile. Getting it? We'll talk about deeper and we'll try to see the project, how it works. But first, I want you guys to have an understanding on what exactly it is doing. Okay, so remember this. Now, along with the default lifecycle, now there are certain other phases of the Maven. Okay, now what is that? So there are other phases. Now here, the difference between these phases of Maven and the one above that you see is, the difference is these are not default lifecycle. When I say default lifecycle, whatever that you call, it is going to come from the beginning and stop at that. Whereas if you call these phases of Maven, it is not dependent of any one of them. That is why these are not called as default lifecycle. Only these are called as default phases of lifecycle. So that way, if you are invoking any one of this, it will be doing a particular activity related to that itself. It will never call any one of them. For example, as I said, if you call package, it is going to come from the beginning and stop. Whereas if you call this clean or site, it is not going to do anything from here. It is going to run only that. Okay, that is why we call it as non-default. And what exactly it is going to do? So if you call a phase called clean, then a clean is basically going to delete all the runtime files that you have created in your project. So what do you mean by runtime files? So by running Maven, whatever files that you have created, it is basically going to delete only that. Okay. So when I say runtime files, now if you look, runtime files are nothing but these class files, this jar or var that you're creating, and while you're running the test, you might be getting some kind of test results in the format of XML files or text files. So those things along with this is what it is going to clean. So that when you are trying to create a product, if you do not want to have any previous reference of the changes that you have created first, it is going to basically remove everything. So clean means it is not going to delete these source code, but whatever the runtime files that you have created, it is going to delete those files. Okay. So clean means it will delete all the runtime files and it will not do anything else. And same way, site is another independent phase which will help us to create documentation of our project. So site will try to take a complete details about how the project is created, what and all details do we have in the project, and then what dependencies do you have in the project. So that way it will be easy for a developer to refer to what is the content of your project through this site. which we will also see it later. Okay, so now understand these two are the phases of Maven. And not only this, in fact, when I told some time back that when you want to call Maven, you will be calling a goal or passing a goal to Maven, right? So these are the default goals which you will be calling to Maven. So this is how when you invoke Maven, you will be giving these names that you are seeing as it is. So these are nothing but internally goals to Maven. So now if you want to do only compile, you will say Maven compile. If you want to do package, you will say Maven package, wherein it will go through all the steps from the beginning. If you want to delete all the runtime files, you will say Maven clean. So these things are not just acting as the lifecycle phases, but these are going to be your default lifecycle phases, and these are going to be the goal which you specify to Maven, through which Maven will take care of creating a project or running the project which you are interested to take care of through Maven. Okay, so remember these are the default goals as well as the phases of the Maven lifecycle. So now when you are trying to invoke, basically the executable for Maven is called as MVN. So if you install Maven on your machine, you will be getting a file called MVN, which is the executable. So when you are calling it, you will be passing a goal to it. So against a project which you are running, you will be giving the goal. So based on the goal that you have given, Maven will try to execute all the phases that it has been attached to. So that is how, if you say Maven install, you are telling the Maven your goal that it has to run for whatever project in which you are invoking this command is the install step or phase. So for install, we know that now it is going to begin from generating the source and resources, and then it is going to compile, and then it is going to do a testing of that files, and then create a package. And after creating a package, it is going to do the install. Same way, if you say Maven clean, it is just going to do only the clean and nothing else. Now, if you want to pass more than one goal, like passing it as clean space compile, now you are saying two goals to the Maven. So what Maven will do is, Maven will first do it in the same order where first it will execute clean. And when it is executing clean, we now know that there is nothing it has to do specifically. Correct? So for clean, it will actually delete it. And then after completing the clean, you have specified one more phase or the goal called compile. And for this, what it has to do, it has to basically do a compilation. And before that, in the compilation, we know the order is first it will generate and then come to compile. So like that, based on the goals that you have given and based on the life cycle phases, it is going to execute it one by one. Now, if you look at this particular phase, now I have given two goals, that is compile and install. Now what will happen? Maven will execute one by one. So first it will try to execute compile. When it is trying to execute compile, what are the first steps it will do? First it will generate the sources and resources, and after that it will try to do the compilation. That is the next step that it is going to do. Now after that, it is going to run the next goal called install. And when you are running install, once again, what does it has to do? It has to come from the beginning where it has to generate the resource compile. But Maven is smart enough not to do the duplication work again, because when you say install, it is actually going to do the compile as part of it, right? So when I say install, it is actually going to come through compile. In the same way, if I first execute compile and then if I running install, for install, since the compile is dependent and you have already executed it, it is not going to run this once again. So it is going to continue from the compile by skipping the compile phase. Okay, so that's how, if you give these two phases together as a goal, then it is not going to run it two times. Basically, both of them is equivalent to just saying Maven install. Okay, so that's how Maven is smart enough to understand and take care of your project. Okay, and further, now if you say something like this, So first it is going to execute the test phase, and for that it will come from the generating sources and resources, compiling, and then it will do the test. And after that it will try to call the next goal clean, where it will perform the clean specifically and it will not do anything else after it.